All right, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, welcome back to another episode of the Midgar Minute podcast. I am Chris, joined by my lovely co-host Trey. Trey, how you doing this evening?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing not too bad. I know it's been a while. It's been a while, but yes, we are back, and we want to talk about a certain YouTube video that dropped about I think at this point about 3 months ago. So a little late to the party on this one. And for those of you who don't know, Subtext over on YouTube dropped a video titled "Why FF7 Rebirth Didn't End How Anyone Expected." Now, I get the feeling that probably most people who are listening to this may have seen this video or may have seen other people like Maximilian Dude or other creators uh, on YouTube or wherever covered this video before. But, we wanted to, put our 2 cents in as well. This is not going to be a full on point for point, like reaction style thing. We're more going to use it as a baseline for things that we want to discuss and talk about. And I highly implore, if you haven't seen it, we will have a link to it in the episode description. Definitely go and check it out. But before we get too far into anything, obviously want to give a huge shout outs to all the lovely folks over at the Mosey Gang who have been patient with the patience of a saint have stuck with us during our dry era of pre in between game era. I don't know what you want to call it, the gray zone, the drought. But
Like the gray zone.
yeah, that's yeah, that works. But I want to give special shout outs, of course, to them and those people, wonderful people, being Scott, Kyle, AJ, Danny, Kevin, Jillian, Brienne, Matt, Sam, Charlotte, Cameron, Garrett, Dan M, Ryan, Petros, Matt M, Tyos48, Colton, Tone, Kimmy, Chris G, John, Flynn, Jim, Joey, Trey, hey, Carmen, hey, Gracie, Benjamin, Lucas, Justin, Alex, Chris, Ellie, and Andrew. Thank you guys so much for your support and your patience. And if anyone listening would like to support the show, we do have links in I believe the episode descriptions and the our social our Instagram, which I have been doing a very poor job of checking as of late. But I'll go into more about stuff because I know people probably wondering like, where have you guys been? What's been going on? I will, and I know I talked about it last time as well, but there have been other updates and things that have happened that I'll talk about at the end of the show. So if you're interested about that, stick around. But if you do want to support, there's ways there. Probably looking into other ways of support as well. And if you just if you want to give $1 a month or $1 one time, you can get access to our Discord. We talk about a lot of FF7 stuff, of course, and not FF7 stuff as well. We share memes and art and music, and it's just a really wonderful space filled with wonderful people. But with that aside, let's get into this video now. Trey, like I said, I don't want this necessarily to be a beat for beat of the video that Subtext made, but I do want to start kind of where he started in the expectations of what Rebirth was going to be. Now, anyone who's listened to the show, or I mean, if it's your first time, if you go back and listen to previous episodes, you'll know kind of what my view on things was as it was happening. And I kind of want to start where I want to start with you, Trey, and what your initial feelings were right on the heels of Remake, and where were you mentally, emotionally, and all the build up leading into Rebirth. How did you feel?
Okay. I mean, I think I felt like a lot of the Final Fantasy 7 fans, and that Remake went pretty well how I expected in terms of the story content and all that. I think we all kind of expected the story to break a little bit, and remake for the most part it was almost exactly the same, but it wasn't quite beat for beat. It expanded on a lot of things. But
Hmm.
they did change up a few story things. Like we saw Sephiroth, which we didn't see him until way later in the original game. So
Hmm.
they did make some story tweaks, but it went pretty well according to plan up until the end when they were able to defeat the Whispers and were able to change fate. And I think at that point, going into the second game, we all as fans we were super hyped for the first game and we knew what we were getting for the most part. We knew what to expect. Even maybe we didn't know what we were getting, but we knew what to expect. And I think going into Rebirth, the Whispers being gone, fate being able to change, it let everyone speculate a lot more going into it, and I think we didn't know what to expect.
Hmm.
And I think that might have been part of um, the discourse there at the end, because even there at the end, we still didn't know what was going on. And I think that was their intent. I think in terms of the story, this is like the middle of it. It's a three-part story. You don't necessarily want to know how it ends, and you don't want to have everything wrapped up, in the middle of it. But going into it, not knowing where it was going and still not knowing where it's going at the end of it, I think that leaves a lot of people feeling confused and that's not how you're supposed to feel when you finish a video game. You're supposed to
Hmm.
complete it and have this sense of, oh, I accomplished this story or this chapter of the story. And well, yeah, it's a chapter. It's not even a satisfying end to a chapter. And I think that's what took me a little while to get my head wrapped around and to get comfortable with. And I think that's uh, what they talk about in the video, and I think that's what I've seen from a lot of people too. Is it's just it didn't the end just didn't have that satisfying feeling that you're accustomed to at the end of a game.
Right. And I also felt that same of like I was very conflicted about the ending of the game because, and as subtext says in the video, it's just kind of like they throw so much stuff at you, and I'm talking the end of Rebirth now. Uh, uh, that they throw so much stuff at you that you kind of like it's amazing, and a lot of it is like really cool what's going on, but it's also kind of like too much. And you kind of at the end of it, and I remember sitting there as the credits are rolling, and I'm just like, I, I didn't even know what to feel necessarily. I mean, I still enjoyed the experience, and I think to bring it back to remake, I think that remake being 98% the same story, the same characters, and the same line of events happening, and then changing that last little bit at the end. I think it definitely, and a lot of other people I'm sure can relate, that it kicked off that part of your brain where it's like, okay, well now what does this mean? What are the implications of what is being talked about and what we saw? And I can admit that I definitely let myself maybe get a little too carried away. But it definitely, as in the lead up
Now,
to
when you
Rebirth.
when you say you got when you say you got too carried away, what do you mean by that? Because for me, it was
So
it was more of a it was all I was very overwhelmed, like you said. It was like so much information all at once. But then once
mhm.
I was able to sit with it for a little bit, I was just like I just kind of sat there, and it was like the Alonzo Mourning meme where he sits there confused for a second, and then he shrugs like, "Oh yeah, I guess that tracks."
Yeah, yeah, no. So when I mean, I let myself get carried away at the end of remake, but not for rebirth necessarily as much, at least initially. But for the ending of remake and all the implications of the things that they were saying, changing, breaking destiny and all this stuff, and you're like, okay, Zach is here, Biggs is alive, there's all these things going on, and you're like, okay, Rebirth is gonna go, they're just gonna go crazy, right? Because it almost felt like remake to me, well, and I guess to a lot of people felt almost like a bait and switch, and I thought that maybe that was the direction that they were gonna go, and then that only amplified when the Yuffie DLC came out. I'm like, oh, now they're introducing Deep Ground, which we shouldn't even know about until years and years from the in the terms of the game. And I'm like, okay, maybe they're going to like restructure things. Maybe they're going to restructure the story. But then obviously as closer to Rebirth coming out and you're hearing more interviews from the team and stuff like that, you're like, okay, it's going to be kind of the same of like remake was, where you have it's going to be mostly the same and with some slight deviations here and there. Now,
So in the interviews you heard, that was them trying to temper the expectations of people like you who are like, "Oh
yeah,
my
like
goodness,
me,
when Rebirth is
who
gonna
were
go, it's gonna go
like,
wild." They were like,
oh,
"Whoa,
they're gonna
oh,
go,
come
it's
on."
this and that, because when I was playing through Rebirth for the first time, I was trying not to let myself fall into that pit of like, oh, okay, what's gonna happen next? I kind of wanted to just experience what they were providing to me, and trying not to let my expectations or anything that I was thinking that I wanted to happen or didn't know was going to happen, cloud my my judgment or anything, or my enjoyment of what I was currently experiencing. But I will admit that I still did feel that there were many times throughout the story, especially in those moments where, like Cisne coming back or something. I'm like, okay, like what are they gonna do? Is like, and then it's like, oh, they didn't. Okay, like nothing really came of that too much. Or even when we would go back to the Zack scenes, I'm like, oh man, like what's gonna happen? And then it would just kind of be like, nothing really would happen, and you're like, huh, okay. And then you just kind of
They
like,
really slow played the Zack, and for
oh yeah,
me, if if we if we get to play as Zack a good chunk in this next game, I think they will have played it perfectly because you
yeah.
get to run around with him, you get to experience him, and but you don't get to battle with him. I don't think until really the very end. But
Yeah,
when you
like you get
do,
that little
it's like
bit.
Cloud, but it's different enough that it feels different. It
Yeah,
feels like a
it's
different person.
it's the point, because I think you only fight with Zack at the very beginning of Rebirth and at the very end. So, to the point where when they reintroduce him back later. Also spoilers, by the way. I'm sure at this point I probably don't have to say it, but yeah, it's huge spoilers. Every spoiler ever. Uh they had to reintroduce they had to like reintroduce his mechanics to you, because it had been dozens of
The
hours
entire
since you
game.
played as him last time. Which, and again, if people can go back and listen to the old episodes, where when Zack coming back, and the theories of like, oh, okay, so Rebirth, you're gonna play half the game as Zack and half the game as Cloud, and Zack's gonna have his own party of like bigs, and maybe like Deep Ground's gonna be his main
And
focus, and like Angeal and
there you go
Genesis are
again.
gonna show up, and it was kind of, and while I obviously like thinking, like kind of giving into that part of my brain, the theory happy part of my brain, and being like, oh man, it could do this, like the head canon of it all, right? I definitely tried to temper a lot of it going through Rebirth, and I think for the most part I was able to, but there were definitely some parts where I'm like, yeah, like I was expecting something and then got something else, and then wasn't disappointed necessarily, but I felt like, oh, okay. And it still was like, oh, okay, it's gonna tie in later, and then like more of the game was happening, and you're getting further along, and you're like, oh, okay, everything, it seems kind of the same still, um and then the
So
last.
like for Sisney specifically,
Mhm,
I fully expect. I think they introduced her in this game. They showed her for the people like us who know who she is. Like we
mhm.
love that little Easter egg part. I but I will feel disappointed if they don't have a payoff with her in the next game with Zack.
Right.
I love that they
And
introduced her. But I wasn't like disappointed that they didn't do more with her or anything, but you
mhm,
had brought her up and before we moved on and I had forgotten. Like that's something that when I play through Rebirth, my judgment of Rebirth as a game depends entirely on how the third game plays out. Because if
yes.
Cisne specifically, if the Zack stuff, if they nail the landing and this game as a trilogy all comes together, I think Rebirth will look back on it and we'll look back on it as maybe a masterpiece, maybe not quite a masterpiece, but if
Hmm.
you love the story that they're trying to tell over the 3 games, I think they have the potential for it to be on that master level. I think it can be a top tier
Hmm.
story as a trilogy.
Right.
But if it's not, that's going to bring Rebirth down. And it's
mhm.
I love talking about it, but it's really hard for me to talk about it in a finality term whenever I'm waiting on the Cisne payoff. I'm waiting on the Yuffie stuff payoff to see if
Right.
there's any
There's a
payoff.
lot of things that did not get that level of payoff. And again, if people go back, because I distinctly remember saying like very early on in this podcast lifespan that I'm like, there's the potential that one day that, when we get to whenever this thing ends, it could suck. And it could not, it could be like maybe they dropped the ball, maybe it, this thing that we're thinking is really great, and if maybe they don't, stick the landing, and we'll all look like fools at the end of it. But I there was never really a point when I was like, it's that part is always going to be like a tiny little part in the back of my head, but it's never really been like a hugely pervasive thing. I'm still, even at the first time I finished Rebirth, at the very end, I was still like, okay, like, I may not understand what's happening right now, but I still have that faith that I'm like, okay, they have planned this out. There's no way that because, and that's another thing I've been very consistent with throughout all of this, is that they have made it very apparent to us that they have planned this out, and that there's been so
Yeah.
much consideration made for this trilogy and for everything that will come after that it but it is definitely still kind of I think just because the way that remake ended, they did kind of set it up to a thing like, okay, like we've broken fate, now what, sort of thing, and I think they maybe intentionally made it that way to kind of, and in the way that Subtext brings up in this video about Rebirth's ending, is kind of that same way of like, oh, to keep us fans engaged in the wait time in between games, right? And theory crafting and all this stuff, and talking about discourse on the internet and everything. But I feel like they definitely, I was shaken a bit more with Rebirth, more so than I was with Remake, at least initially. It took me,
I
and
mean, that makes sense because we talked about how the ending didn't hit the way everyone expects an ending to
right,
hit.
it
It
took
makes
it took
sense for
time
people to
for it
feel.
to really sink in of like what I truly felt about the ending of Rebirth.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
while I will say I always believed in them to tell the story, I loved Rebirth. I went into it, I think, with the right expectations because I loved everything about Rebirth in the moment. Even I loved
Hmm.
all the story, all of the small little things, up until the end, and I loved the end, but it was just so much, so fast. It was overwhelming, and it
Yes,
just took too long to process.
and and now I was gonna bring this up before, but now I remember. Um, there was a point in Rebirth where at the very end, when you're walking up to the altar where Aerith is praying, that was the moment where I'm like, okay, forget about everything that has come before this. This is the moment, right? And I think I can guarantee probably most, if not all, people were also feeling like, okay, this is going to be, if they're going to change fate, whatever. Because when you talk about Final Fantasy VII and changing fate, right, the first thing that comes to anybody's mind is Aerith, right, and her death, and being like, and that was part of the discourse from second one of being like, oh, we're
Now,
changing fate.
I'm trying to remember how it played out. That moment, you mentioned it, the moment you see Aerith, I feel
Mhm.
like from that moment until the end of the game, that was like the moment they like in Fast and the Furious, they hit the NOS and you just started going.
Right,
And
because they
I think that was a good choice to make if because I think they wanted to overwhelm you with the
yeah,
information.
they
I
wanted
think
you to
they
be
wanted to do that,
overstimulated.
and I think they picked the perfect moment to ramp everything up because it was the moment, like you said, we were all waiting on, and it was like that roller coaster. We were strapped in, ready to go, and then boom, we were off.
Yeah, like I mean, I had kept my mind in check, for throughout most of Rebirth. There were definitely certain moments, certain events happening or certain characters showing up that got that part of my brain tingling. But I'm like, okay, no, gotta, let's keep it, let's wait, let's see how the game goes and let's see where it ends. And but that moment of, you that little resting spot that you get before you walk up to the altar and the game even is like, this is the last top, point you're going to be able to rest. And I'm like, okay, here we go. This is going to be the thing, right? And it is so, even like thinking back on it now, I definitely, for that first playthrough, I remember that was the most anxious I've ever been because at the time, even up until that very moment, I didn't know what I wanted, right? Because a lot of people, and me and Nick had talked about it a lot in the past, and I'm sure plenty of other people talked about it, that Aerith's death is such a quintessential part of this story that how could they possibly keep her alive, right? But there's a part of me that's like, oh, but if they could do it, I want to see how that would work. You know what I mean? Outside of like just a fan canon sort of thing. You know what I mean? And been
Before
like,
remake,
okay, I was afraid and anxious, but like hopeful at the same time. It was like it was a very complex set of emotions, which I mean, I guess considering what everything was during that entire ending sequence, I'm like, yeah, maybe that's exactly what they concocted it to be like, that's exactly the intended effect of all of that.
and I certainly wasn't alone in this prediction before remake, but I said I thought that they would end up having Aerith be saved, and then she would have to die at the end to save the planet, to save the
Right,
host.
like
And that
maybe she wouldn't die at the Forgotten Capital, but she would ultimately die at the end of the
right,
story.
I thought that either her or her and Zach would have to sacrifice themselves, and that would kind of be the way they told the story of loss and how to deal with loss, and accepting that, because that's the story they want to tell. I think is Cloud finding a way to accept Aerith and Zach, but mainly Aerith dying,
Mhm.
without having to be emo depressed boy for a couple years and get
Right, right.
whatever that sickness was called.
Yeah, so and then
But
even
I think
just
that's how I think it'll play out. But with this, it's even more interesting because I think it's whatever. I think they want to. Sephiroth's going to use this as the mental break for Cloud in the next game to try and break him completely, because he didn't break him
yes.
completely in the first simulation. So if he can
Yeah,
break him completely in this go around, and I think that's what it's setting up for.
right. And then and if you take into account all the other things and all the other ideas and theories that were floating around of like different timelines, different, these other worlds, the reunion, all these things, the confluence of emotions and all these things that Sephiroth is talking about during that ending sequence. It it really, I think that also kind of helped feed that side of me where it's like, okay, you know, even if it's this or that, and they were playing like almost toying with you in that way of like, okay, we're gonna play with that, and you say, the sequence happens, and initially like Cloud does it, he saves Aerith, and then it's like, well, no, he doesn't, and then it's like, well, okay, so what does that mean? Does you know is this a sequel? Is this a sequel to everything that came before? Like that was the prevailing theory, and I think still it definitely still holds water even after Rebirth. But there was just, I feel like there was just so much, and maybe I'm just talking for myself here, and I hopefully other people will understand, but just all those different ideas kind of coalescing in my mind and being like, okay, I think that definitely added to the overwhelming nature of it all. And then on top of like, okay, now Cloud and Zack are fighting Sephiroth together, which is something that I was like, I was like freaking the fuck out about when it happened. but I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be like a third game, like final thing, and that kind of threw me off too. And there was a lot of points during that entire ending gauntlet of, the boss fights and all the stuff that like it kept throwing me off. And at some point I just kind of gave up on trying to guess at where the story goes, because that is a fatal trait, a fatal flaw that I have with when I think about things. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm trying to intuit how the story is going to go, right? Because I've played a lot of games, I've watched a lot of movies and shows and stuff,
You you
ingested a
like
lot of
solving
media
the
over my
you like
life.
solving the crime before the hour episode is over.
Right, right. And that's like I tried, so hard to keep that part kind of died down a little bit, and I've gotten better with it over the years, and I've kind of relearned how to just enjoy something for what it is currently showing me, and then afterwards kind of then you can analyze and go nuts about it. But I think because of Rebirth, and I mean it's obviously very special to me and special to everyone else listening to this, there was a lot riding on this. It was kind of like, the biggest thing for, FF7 fans in, you know, over 20 years. So you're thinking like, okay, what are they going to do? So, and, thinking, and they threw so much and doing all these things. And I felt like,
Do you think so? It sounds like they threw maybe not too much, but they threw too much at the end and not enough in the beginning and the middle
right.
with it for you.
I think so, and it's funny to say that considering how much stuff is in Rebirth and how much they stuffed into that game. But yeah, because you think about, the ending of Remake, and it's like, okay, we get the little sprinkles of Zack throughout the story. It's not nearly as much, and I'm like, okay, and that was fine. I didn't necessarily
You
need Zack to be.
you say Rebirth has so much, but I feel like the story up until that end point, like the Temple of Ancients is a really cool mechanic thing, but I feel like the story for the most part goes fairly
Was
according to plan.
Yeah, and it is the same, and I think I'm more speaking like generally in terms of like there's just a lot of stuff in terms of like the actual plot of, like the new plot, I guess, or all the new information and things like that is definitely really sparse if you take out,
And
all
you
the
have
other
to add
stuff
in
that
the
is
fact
exactly the
that
same.
you have to add in the fact that your mindset, you went into this super hyped with all of this fantasy booking, all of this world crafting you've done, and they had just broken fate. So you went in expecting things
Like,
to go
okay, like
haywire,
things
and
and
the first 85% of it goes exactly how you would expect it to go.
right,
And I can
right.
see exactly how that would be like, well, all right, where's the thing? Where's the thing? Where's the thing? And then they give you so much of the thing that it's like, whoa, too much.
Right, and even if you think about it, going and that the opening sequence of Rebirth is that alternate world with Zack, and you're like, oh, okay, like we're starting with this, like what the fuck is going on? We're not starting at Calm, we're not starting at the flashback, like what are we doing? So I think that kind of fed into it a little bit, but I will say, and excuse me, I'm a little under the weather here, so I'm sorry if I sound a little nasally and stuff some here and there. But I feel like the lead up, like right before Rebirth came out, I definitely was like, was seeing things and being like, okay, it is relatively going to be the same, right? But I mean, I there was also a part of me that is just going to be like, maybe they're just like they're trying to the hoodwink us, they're trying to play it close to the chest and be like, oh yeah, it's totally going to be the same. And
The
even
classic
honestly,
undersell.
right. And it's like I think they could have still even with when the third game comes out, I do expect now, I mean especially now, expect it to be mostly okay, we're going to, go to the same locations, things, meet the, you know, Shira and all these, we're going to go to Rocket Town and all these, do all these things, and I'm like, okay, well we could do those things, but there's and the
Do you
same
think
rationale I
so?
had for Rebirth is that, oh, you could still fit in a lot of new stuff there, and they did. It's not a lot, I guess, if you really think
I
about
was
it in
gonna
the
ask
grand scope of it, but
I was gonna ask you later, so in the 3rd game, what would you what but y since you're talking about it now, it makes sense to bring it up now. So with the 3rd game, you just said you expect it to just be more of the same in terms of going down the same beats and paths.
right.
I For me, I think this is where they mixed it up. I think we go to Wutai with the war and deal with that stuff, and I think that's where
Mhm.
Yuffie and maybe
Right,
Jin
and you
get
have to
bumped up.
think about, yeah, you gotta think about all the other stuff that they introduced, like, they introduced Glenn in here, and they all that stuff, and, um, all
Yeah,
the
so they
interim
definitely
Wu-Tai
have to tie
government
that
and all
up.
that. Yeah.
But I think there's going to be a crossover where Zach comes in to the world. I think, and if not, I think I'll be a little let down. If it's
Mhm.
literally just like it was last game, where it's two worlds running parallel and then meeting up together at the very end. I want some intertwining in my multiverse in this 3rd game, and I think that's what I'm hoping for and looking for.
Yeah, and I honestly, because at the time, you gotta remember, I mean, nowadays, the whole multiversal concept is, it's kind of unfortunate because there just so happen to be a lot of other media properties doing that same thing at that same time. So I feel like now people are kind of on like multiverse and stuff like that. And and kind of like how a lot of people I would say felt about the ending of Rebirth and that entire ending sequence. Like, it's a little fan servicey, right? There's a little bit, and I'm not gonna say that fan service is inherently a bad thing, because there have been plenty of times where I'm like, oh, this is something that was 100% included just for fan service, and I still enjoyed it. Like, I am a fan that was serviced by this thing, so, like, you know what I mean. I
And
don't
just
think it's
because something is
obviously
done doesn't make it bad.
right, and it's not something, unless it is like the only thing that they're doing, because there have definitely been things that I've seen where it's like, oh, it's only fan service, and that's that you're writing fully on the fan service in order to make
Oh
the
yeah, but this
have
literally
people enjoy the thing, and it's like that I don't like. You need to have a substance there. You need to have other things there to substantiate what is going on in your story. I mean, you don't have to. I'm not, but in
no, but
my
they have
opinion, I feel
admits
like
and
what makes a good story is something that can incorporate those elements while not taking away from what they're also trying to accomplish or tell with the rest of the story. You know what I mean? And not that, and I don't think that they did that necessarily with Rebirth. I mean, it felt, after the high of like experiencing it at first, and fighting Sephiroth with Aerith, and all that stuff, which again, like that almost that exact same sequence is exactly what I imagined what was going to happen in the 3rd game, except I thought that it was going to be Cloud, Zack, and Aerith fighting together against Sephiroth, which I still think could happen, honestly. That could still
yeah,
be how the 3rd game ends.
yeah, I think that's how the 3rd game is going to end. But I think with just having and between remake and rebirth, it was a lot of, well, how many timelines are there? How wild are they going to get? And I think
Right.
they've pretty well
Hmm.
established there's just the two that are playing out, that are active and that matter. Um,
Right, because
but
there
they've
are
had the live
more.
streams. Yeah, they've had the live stream story for forever, since the 90s. They've had that live stream and
Yeah,
how
since
everything's just a big circle and all that.
mhm.
So this isn't something new that they're springing, but I think the idea is, I think they wrote the story and it called for a multiverse. And uh, I mentioned that there's two timelines, but something they brought up in the video is there at the end with the dream day, and when Aerith says "Don't look up,"
Mhm.
that being the live stream Aerith. And I'm not sure why I thought that would transition well here, but for some reason my
No,
brain
I
said to
mean,
bring it up. Oh, because I
yeah,
was talking about how there's the two timelines, but I think that's like a 2.5 timeline. Is I think, and the video brought it up. I think them having that be like the live stream Aerith talking to Cloud. And then because at the end it has Sephiroth like open the door and she like pushes him out and it's got the picture like Cloud falling.
right.
Um I think that moment is so important, and they talk about it in the video because they tie it in with the book, and I'm not going to step all over the video, but I think that moment is really important, and it's something that when we were playing the game, again, I don't think we thought it was as important as we will when
Right,
everything wraps
when we
up
have the
completely.
full context. And yeah, I guess to tie it back into the video a little bit, it kind of like is and Subtext made a lot of references to the Star Wars trilogy, the original Star Wars trilogy, in reference to this story. And specifically, and I even remember that was kind of being thrown around before Rebirth came out. But when we first found out that it was going to be a trilogy, people immediately started making the comparisons, and being like, okay, Rebirth is going to be the dark middle chapter and blah 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 blah. And something that Subtext brings up in this, and for full disclosure, I guess if anyone who doesn't know at this point, I don't want to say that that I'm not, or that I am still a Star Wars fan. Star Wars was a very influential thing for me in my childhood and growing up, and was super huge into it. Um, but there when he's bringing up Empire Strikes Back, right, which is, I think, unequivocally, you ask pretty much any Star Wars fan, they're probably going to say Empire Strikes Back is their favorite. Still my favorite. And he brings up a point here, and that's something that I honestly didn't know about, was that at the time that Empire Strikes Back came out, people didn't like it. Like, people were confused by it, and didn't understand where it was going, and like what, and they had certain expectations going into Empire Strikes Back, and had those expectations subverted. And for, anyone who is a Star Wars fan and has experienced the sequel trilogy, subverting expectations, uh, can be a good thing, but also can be a bad thing. Uh, Even though, and this is, I don't want to harp on too much about Star Wars here, but even like The Last Jedi is something I'm like, okay, when that movie came out, I remember leaving the theater feeling that is the most conflicted I had felt about something ever, right? Up until that point, and especially Star Wars, really, because I didn't mind Force Awakens. I'm like, okay, it's kind of a retread, whatever. Kind of, almost honestly, a lot of ways, kind of like how remake is kind of, I don't want to draw too much a comparison between the sequel trilogy of Star Wars and the Final Fantasy VII trilogy, because I hope it doesn't go the same way, like beat for beat there. Um, but in that same way of like in Last Jedi, they subverted your expectations, and the only reason that they had done that was like, okay, we just want to subvert your expectations, and that's it, right? But you also got to remember that the sequel trilogy of Star Wars was not planned out, and was just like, we got different directors, and there was no cohesive through line throughout any of it, and it shows. Whereas that's why I wasn't as really concerned with that with the FF7 trilogy, because they did plan it out. And maybe at points I was like, because I had seen people talking about, like, did they change their minds? Did they, there was an article that Subtext brings up of an interview that came out right before Rebirth came out, of like, oh, like, we can, we might change how the third game it plays out depending on people's reactions to Rebirth, right? Which I vaguely remember that article, and like hearing murmurings about that article coming out before Rebirth. And mine, that initially, like, that statement on its own is like, okay, like, that makes sense to me, right? But I understand why a lot of people kind of be like, all right, maybe that's kind of a red flag, kind of a problem, because then you're kind of dipping your toes into, like, all right, well, now it isn't so much your guys' vision as is like, oh, we just want to appease the fans, and just, there's
Again, that's one of
choices
those
that they're
things
going to
that you have
make
to.
initially that they're going to go back on later, and like that's stuff I don't like as much, but I don't think that's what's happening here, with the
Yeah,
Final
that's one of
Fantasy
those
VII
things you have
trilogy.
to wait and like see what they're doing, and you have to believe in the people creating the thing. I think that means, like, for example, they're paying attention to what the fans think. So They saw in Remake. I don't even remember what the guy's name is, but he's the dude who rode the motorcycle and he had the cool haircut, and we all loved him.
Oh,
Um,
Roach.
maybe Roach, yeah. So
Yeah.
that comment could be as innocent as we're paying attention and oh, we saw the fans loved this new guy, so we're gonna write him another thing to keep him like or what a
Right.
comment like that can be so innocent and so nothing that for me I don't even like giving it this much attention
Mhm.
until it's a problem because like at that point we're like pointing like it's like pointing it out when it's not even
Right.
an issue. I
We're pointing at shadows at this, at that point and being like,
Right.
we don't even know
Now,
what's
but back to
happening.
the Star Wars thing because you
Mhm.
you lost me about halfway through because I'm a very casual Star Wars fan. I came to
Okay.
them after all 9 were out. I watched
Yeah.
all 9, really enjoyed all 9 of them, thought it was fine, thought they were all really good movies. So, for me, watching this video and seeing that people didn't like the second one, and I'm just going in timeline order. So people didn't like the second movie, right? Is what he kept
Yeah.
talking about in the video.
Empire.
And that's the one where it's like Darth Vader is the dad and everybody looks like shit's just going real south, right? At the end, and
Right.
everybody's
Mhm.
just like, I love that parallel because that confusion and that hopelessness and that just and what do you call it, the subversion of expectation.
Right.
That is exactly what everyone experienced at the end of Final Fantasy VII, and I
Mhm.
think that is. I also had no idea that people didn't like the second movie when it came out, but it makes sense in the idea that they were expecting something else and they didn't get it.
They
And
got something different, and they, as we all well know, anything that is different, people are skeptical, if not outwardly
and
negative about. You know.
all of those videos were like instant reactions. They were like there with their video recorders outside the movie theater. So it was literally getting people's instant reactions. But again, we talk about the Final Fantasy VII ending, and it was our instant reaction.
Hmm.
So I loved how well that all lined up because Star Wars is such a huge. It's like the trilogy that people think of, at
Right.
least in my opinion. Like there's The Godfather, but with us nerds in our nerd community, I feel like Star Wars is the trilogy,
Yeah, it's like
and to
Star
be able to
Wars, Lord of the
compare.
Rings, maybe.
Right. Yeah, Lord of the Rings was the second one that came to mind, but it didn't fit my point. So
Right.
I'm just running with this one. But yeah, like for so many people, Star Wars is the trilogy, and to be able to compare them point by point, I thought that really made it easy for someone who, like me, who isn't as cultured, who hasn't watched as many YouTube videos as you have about like all the different theories and everything.
Hmm.
So breaking it down and explain like I'm five terms did a great job at that, and I think the Star Wars comparison was just perfect.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting because you got to think about because Empire Strikes Back came out in uh like the mid '80s, I believe, or it was like mid or early '80s. I don't know directly off the top of my head right now. Excuse me. But it's interesting to see that, and then you fast forward till now where everybody's got internet, everyone's able to put out their opinions the second that they have them, and all these things, and the media landscape in general has changed so much, and the media consumption landscape has changed so much, but these sorts of things can still happen, right? That those there's certain similar things and commonalities that kind of stay consistent throughout time. And I just think it's really neat to see those sorts of things, and kind of other I've had other experiences with that with another show I really like, Twin Peaks. Came out in the early '90s,
That was
and
by
it was this.
Lynch, right?
Yes, and it was another thing where I saw a YouTube video of there's a news report of people having essentially, like if we had if they had Discord back then, like having these sorts of like literal meetings where people would get together and theorize about stuff, and in person, and just to see all that stuff kind of transcend through time, and how we enjoy and uh, ingest all this
Imagine if
media is just really nice to me. I don't know, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside sometimes.
what's a show that's on right now that people watch? like a TV show.
Uh,
Imagine if we all got together to watch after like weekly, like the I know it's not on now, but Game of Thrones when it was huge.
mhm,
Imagine if we all got together at the library once a week to talk
right.
about Game of Thrones. Like that's what it was like back
And
then. Was
honestly,
everybody would just
if
like
Game
get
of
together.
Thrones, if it came out, in the 80s, 90s, and it was as popular as it was when it came out, then I think that would be happening, and it
Oh
probably.
yeah, I do too, but I think it's interesting. And again, we watched the video. It's 2 hours. It's a long video, but it's worth the watch, I think. And another reason is
Oh yeah.
you're talking about the story structure and how just in turn, like if you were in a class and they would teach you how to tell stories, he goes into that, I think, in depth pretty well and breaks it down with the video and using that to explain things
Yeah,
that
and
as someone who, like you said earlier, you consume things, you're watching for the steps that you know are coming, the beats, the one, two, three, four. Um, as consumers, we know these things are coming, but watching him lay it out beat by beat, it makes it so obvious for things that like I didn't even consider it before.
oh yeah, and that's something, and I guess to do like a little bit of background on subtext, and he goes into it in the video, but he is a writer himself, so he has other videos on his channel. He doesn't have too many, and I'm surprised he only has like almost 9,000 subscribers, and I'm like, damn, this guy should he should definitely have more. Um, but yeah, it's just, and I think, yeah, if you can, consume enough media, obviously you get a little bit used to things, and things, you can start spotting like tropes and certain things a different way. And even with Rebirth, I didn't feel a lot of that really throughout, and even in the ending and all the crazy stuff that's going on, it really threw me off. And I mean, even still, like even a year plus after the game has been out, I still really don't know what to think about all the things that they tell you at the end of that game, and what it's all going to mean. But I
And
love that
and
though,
you
and I
shouldn't.
know.
I don't think you should.
No, no, and that's exactly, and like tying it back to Star Wars, it's like, yeah, if we want to think about it as a full trilogy, which we should, and I think a lot of people be and I can understand a little bit, because we the only way that we have experienced the story of FF7 up until this point was the original game, and of course all the compilation material, but the story of FF7 was only just the one game, right? If you want to get down to like bare bones, it was one game. And obviously, like when Remake came out and the whole kerfuffle about, oh, why are they calling it Remake and it's only a third of the game, blah 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 blah, you know that aside, it's like I think it's almost like people forgot about that it was like, oh, this, because we knew that it was when they showed off Rebirth for the first time, that's when they announced that it was going to be a trilogy. And it almost seems like a lot of people, and myself included, to a certain extent at least, forgot that part playing through Rebirth. And I think maybe because Rebirth it's so exciting, and and at no point, obviously, and it's made well apparent, if you listen to the show, I love Rebirth, and I still love it. I there was never a point where I disliked it, uh but yeah, there's that, certain, there were certain expectations to be had there. And I feel like a lot of people did forget about it being that. And then honestly, it wasn't until I had time to think about it and be like, oh, like, okay, like Rebirth can be, as, I don't want to say unfulfilling, because I didn't feel unfulfilled when I finished that game. I felt very full, very filled by by the end of Rebirth. Uh I just, I maybe, yeah, like me and a lot of other people, just probably, our expectations, we let them get a little too out of control, and been like, okay, well now, if you feel this way at the end of the third game, then
That's
maybe
what I was
there's a
getting ready to
discussion to be
say.
had about, like, oh, did they fail at what they were trying to do, sort of thing, right? But we don't know yet. We simply just don't know
My
yet. And and it's something that I'm like, okay, I can understand people's criticisms of Rebirth, and I can understand, even people's criticisms of Remake, and like I was alluding to before, of like, like the calling it remake and whatever, and what not going so far as to call it false advertising as some people did, but I always like to see things from as many different perspectives and angles as I can, just because I really have a passion for understanding things. I want to understand people. I want to understand viewpoints and perspectives and different cultures and stuff. I just that
And
is just
and
part of who I am.
they purposely want you to not understand.
Right. And that's
So
why maybe it feels like there was many points where it felt like, oh, like I felt that pushback of like, oh no, this is not, but in when those things happen, and there are certain things, and again, to reference like something like Twin Peaks, which is a very sort of obtuse show. It starts out kind of, you're like, oh, this is just a murder mystery type thing, and then it definitely goes into things that are a lot crazier and abstract and all that stuff. And I like those things, and when something is shown to me and it's like it's not readily understandable, right? And you need to put in that legwork in order to feel something. And not necessarily saying that a game or a show or movie has to tell me exactly what to feel and exactly what to think, because I honestly fucking hate that when things do that. So I like it to be a bit more obtuse. I like to these game makers and movie makers and all these creatives out there. I like when they let their audience suffer, for lack of a better term, in turn,
wonder
of just like trying to, wade through all this stuff. Like it makes me want to
since
understand it more, and it kind of makes me more engaged and more interested, and
you mentioned
even.
doing the legwork a second ago,
Mhm,
and
right,
so doing the legwork, and they should do the legwork. They need to do the story. They need to tell the story. But you bring up
right.
Twin Peaks, and while we're talking about Twin Peaks, you love the story, but you mentioned how it starts as one thing and it slowly but surely goes into more and it becomes more obtuse. I
Hmm.
wonder if you had consumed that on a weekly basis and then had to wait a year between each season, if
Mm.
you would have had these same types of feelings about the show until it became its whole thing.
That it's an interesting point, and that honestly, that if you want a more accurate representation for that, I will another show I'll bring up, Attack on Titan, which is an anime for people who don't know. Highly recommend it, by the way. Is It's a show where the first season came out in 2013, or like like end of 2012, beginning of 2013, and then it got massively popular. If you were around at that time, you didn't watch anime, you probably even still saw it in some form somewhere. And then there was a 6-year gap, I believe, between the first and the second season. And I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, talk about striking while the iron is cold. But then they proceeded to not only come back and provide one of the best seasons of the show. They kept doing it, and every season, and then the release schedules got a lot tighter as they went on, thankfully. But Attack on Titan is, and I'll probably say this for a very long time, one of the best written stories and best executed stories that I've ever seen in any fiction. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic or anything. I genuinely believe that, and would highly
So
recommend it to anyone out there.
you
And
call it
that
best.
was that same thing where at that point, like, there is a lot of mystery, there's a lot of intrigue, there's things where like you think it's going to go this way, and then something happens, and now it's about this, and you know
You said it
it
was the
can.
best written and best what else? This,
I'm sorry,
when you
you
said it
cut
was
out
the
there.
best written and the best something else, but I don't remember what the other thing was. Um,
What did I say now?
the
The
best
best
written and the best
written,
executed, I think, executed.
executed. Yes, yes,
So
yes.
so you mentioned how hyped you were for Rebirth. I think
Mhm.
my hype level is matching your for the third game is matching your hype level for the second. So let's say my hopes and dreams, your hopes and dreams come through. They nail everything for Rebirth or for the third game. So
Mhm.
everything in Rebirth ties in with it perfect. Everything makes sense. It's just like the Star Wars trilogy. If if it reaches that level, do you think it has the chance to reach that same level of writing and execution as Attack on Titan?
I mean, yes and no, because like you're saying,
I try to hold a gun to you and just put you on the spot, and you still find a way to weasel onto that fence.
okay. Well, I mean, it's hard. Like we were saying before, it's hard to say without knowing. But I mean, I guess taking what you said into like if everything is mad and everything's whatever, then yeah. I mean, yeah. If they
Okay.
can take every all these new plot threads and all this and all the other kind of and we I've talked about it on the show in the past is that you know what I am have and I've still and even now I'm still hopeful about what this trilogy is that if they can take all of these things and all the compilation material and all the original story, everything, the books, everything, and weave it into and maybe it won't be that deep, because I think, I there was
Right.
definitely a part of me
Some
where
of
it's
it
like
might have to. Some
yeah,
of it
some
might
of
have
it's
to be
probably going to
like.
get left by the wayside, and that's fine. That's okay. It doesn't. They don't have to. It doesn't have to bring every little minute detail into. Oh, we can. As much as it pains me, like Kunsel can just be a name drop. We don't. He doesn't have to show up in the third act of the last game and been like, "Hey guys, I brought like, like." Fucking Rise of Skywalker, bringing it back to Star
Mhm.
Wars, and how that can blow up in your face when you're trying, like, hey, we're just when fan service becomes the thing that you're like,
The
oh
main
yeah,
point.
the whole thing is weighted on this fan service, and like, hey, remember this thing, remember that thing, and to be fair, they are not treating even remake and rebirth. We're not treating the story of FF7 like that. I mean, there definitely are nods to
No.
things and little things like Kunsel and other little nods here and there, but even if you don't know who Kunsel is, right? That changes literally nothing about the greater story. you
And
know?
I wanted to ask because again, everything I wanted from Rebirth I got. So I'm going into this third game with the highest of expectations. I
Oh
have
yeah, I
all
mean,
of the hype, and but I also I think it can be like that master tier of story and master tier execution. But because I am so sold, I'm like 100% bought in. I wanted to ask you because Rebirth didn't hit quite the same way for you as it did for me. But to know that you still see that potential in the story as
mhm.
it has the chance to wrap up, that just makes me see I'm not like just looking at it with blinders on. It is objectively that great of storytelling they are doing. I'm not
Right,
just a
and
fanboy.
I guess
Or
the
maybe we're
best way
both
that
just fanboys.
yeah, the best way that I could put it is that my faith in this FF7 trilogy may have been shaken at times, but it never broke. Like even at the shakiest times, it never broke. There was never a point where I was like, "Oh, they don't know what they're doing. They're just going to change everything based on what people are saying and blah blah." I still think that they have a vision that they had in mind from the beginnings of whenever this planning started for this thing up until it the third game comes out and whatever happens beyond that, because who knows what's going to happen beyond this third game, because I doubt I doubt that they're just going to stop. I mean,
I think we
there
might
will
get some
be
books.
yeah, we'll get some other side. I don't think they're gonna like, oh, let's do wait another 20 years and do another trilogy. I
Now,
don't think that we're gonna go that deep, but um
you mentioned it was shaken, but then you got the firm belief in them again. Do you think this
yeah.
video solidified that belief? Because I think the video made me believe even more in the third game and might have gotten me even more hyped with how he
Oh, a
using his
thousand
story
percent.
writing background. I think he managed to really get me to believe in it even more somehow and to get me even more hyped. Did
A
you feel that
thousand
with you when
percent.
you watched it?
1,000%. And it's also because, like I said, it took me, and subtext also mentioned that it took him months, several months of reflecting on Rebirth to come around to it. And it was the same for me, is that I may not have known how to feel about it initially, like fully, just because it was very heady and there's a lot of stuff going on. But now that I've had a lot of time to think on it, and I've since played the game again. you know I and much like him, and I'm sure you and a lot of other people are like, okay, no, like this is absolutely going to, like there's I have almost virtually zero doubt in my mind that when we get to the end of the third game, that we are going to be satisfied as fans. And it's something that they there's no way. I mean, there and I've said from the very very beginning of this thing, there's always going to be the tiniest little nugget of doubt, because that's just, again, another quirk of my brain. Is that there's always just going to be that little quirk of, like, maybe it's going to suck, and maybe it's going to be terrible, maybe we're going to all look stupid. But that is not something that I am letting, like, you know be pervasive in my thoughts whenever I'm thinking about this game, whenever I'm thinking about, because and if you think about,
even if they don't nail the landing, I don't think we'll look stupid, and I don't think we'll regret
no, yeah,
having the
and
chance
I will
to have the
never,
remake.
yeah, I don't think I'll ever regret, doing, playing any of these games or talking about it on this podcast for all this time. Or, it was still, just like the original, it is still affecting me. And, tying it back to the video, and, a quote that you had mentioned before, when subtext, he brings up George R. R. Martin in regards to an ending of a story, right? That it's like, even though this is not an ending of a story, but it needs to make a story needs to make you feel something, right? If it doesn't make you feel anything, then it has failed as a story, right? And I fully agree with that. And I feel like, when I watch a movie or play a game, that to me, I don't have to love every single thing that I watch or play, but it needs to evoke something out of me. And Rebirth definitely did. And it wasn't, um wasn't negative. Even at my most confused with Rebirth, I never felt anything negative about it, and I still, because in my heart, I'm always a Final Fantasy VII fan. And, like, that game, just like how Star Wars was very influential to me growing up, FF7 was massively, hugely influential to me. And story, like how I engage with stories and characters, and you know plot developments, all these things that I didn't really think about, because I mean, I was also like 7 years old. So it was like, when you're 7 years old, you're not thinking about the minutia of plot threads and character development and things like that. But now that I'm older and then can appreciate those things and really, you know find that
You don't
extra
realize
level of
it's gonna make
enjoyment.
you an eco-terrorist until it makes you an eco-terrorist.
Right. Exactly. And that's like in the, even revisiting the original game, or going back and revisiting anything that you've enjoyed a lot in previously in your life, and you can come at it with that new perspective. And hey, and even, like, even bringing it back to Rebirth, playing it a second time, even, a couple months after the fact, even that was like, oh, okay, like, now that I don't have that looming, like, oh, what's gonna happen, now that I can just ingest what is being told to me, and can think about it a bit more rationally and not be so emotion driven. Even though, an argument could be made that the emotion is part that should be the main concern of it all, right? Because and I do agree with that. I feel like, really, in an ideal world, most stories would be a fine blend of both emotion and analytical, right? Like
You
a perfect blend of both sides of your brain, sort of thing. You know
are
what I
you
mean?
it's like you had your emotion, like your RPMs in your car, your emotion level was revved up into the red for
Oh
the
yeah.
most. And now you've got it into that like 4 or 5 range where you're still revving really good. You're still going smooth, but you're not going too hard
Right,
on the
right.
emotional
And
scale.
that's something, and it will always be consistent with me, and I love this world. I love these characters, and even for, even the wacky stuff like, Before Crisis or Dirge of Cerberus, right? Even the wackier parts of Crisis Core. It's like I love all that stuff, even though a lot of the compilation material feels very disjointed and like, oh, we don't know how this is gonna perfectly fit into everything else, but it doesn't necessarily have to, because think about, yeah, when you think about, what a lot of people's mindsets were going into Rebirth, of like, oh, we got, all these things. We got Zack back. We have Deep Ground being reintroduced. We have all these different, you know, disparate parts of the compilation material converging onto the thing. I'm like, okay, so they're going to take all this stuff that I thought was a little clunky, a little weird, a little, like not well put together in a like grander story sense, and recontextualize and do all these things. And and now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I don't really need it to do all that. I don't need them to take every little bit about, the FF7 world and lore that has been out up until this point and be like, oh, we gotta really. But there was a point in time when I did think that way, when I was like, oh, okay, that's what they're going to do. That's the plan. That's the big picture at the end of it, right? But
So for you and fans like you, it's almost like Rebirth reset the expectations for you.
right, and not in a bad way. I must make clear. It's
No,
definitely,
because
it like
so
kind of recentered me a little bit, you know?
yeah, listening to you, it sounded like in your brain going into Rebirth, there were like 1,000 tentacles going out.
Oh yeah,
And
it
Rebirth,
was
I
a
think they did a
fucking
really good job of they they kept like the two timelines and 2.5 with
they
the
kept
dream and
enough. They
the
kept enough there. They were jingling enough keys where it was like
but
that part could not completely be like, oh, I can't just ignore that part, you know?
right, but they kept it so I don't want to say like they kept it simple compared to what it could have been. Instead of those
Mhm.
thousands of tentacles, they had the two universes, and they kept it so simple. I think in the second game that as long as if you have what are the people called with Yuffie? The underground people. If you have them
Yeah,
pop up in Wutai, you can tie that up
deep
with
ground, yeah.
Wutai because they're already teasing that with Glenn. And then as long as you tie up the two timeline stuff, they don't have a whole lot of loose ends that I'm necessarily looking at thinking, well, they're gonna have to do a lot of work to tie
Right,
this
and
knot.
they don't have to, because I'm thinking, and it maybe was because of the time, like maybe the pervasiveness of like the MCU and stuff at the time, and being a lot of people's mental headspace in regards to media was kind of being overshadowed by a lot of the stuff the MCU is doing, and being like, oh, they're going to reintegrate this or reintegrate this and blah blah blah. Honestly, I don't, I remember when Maximilian dude played the Yuffie DLC, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, Deep Ground, they're just going to be a reference. It's just a reference. They're not going to come back." And my initial thought when he said that was like, "Oh no," because he doesn't like Dirge of Cerberus or Deep Ground, and he doesn't like all that stuff. But I'm like, oh no, they're gonna be back, and it's gonna, we're gonna see Azul and all these Rosso the Crimson and all these weirdos coming back.
It
And
won't
even
be
though
it won't ruin the third game, but if he's right and they don't pop up at all, I'll be a little
it's,
disappointed. I'll be a
I
little
mean,
sad.
I'll be disappointed, but in
It
my
won't break the
mind,
game, but I'll be a
no.
little sad.
But I was gonna say that, yeah, if they don't come back, and if they were just a reference, and it'd be like, hey, like the events of Dirge of Cerberus are still gonna happen, right? I'm kind of okay with that. I'm more okay with it than I would have been a year ago. You know what I mean? Like where because I thought Deep Ground and all this stuff. I thought we were gonna see more of them in Rebirth. I thought they were gonna delve more into that stuff, and we're gonna we had Kyrie from The Kids Are All Right, and there's other stuff. I'm like, oh, they're gonna tie all this stuff in, and everything's gonna exist at the same time because you think about Deep Ground and I thought it was, and anytime when they do this with a story where it's just like, oh yeah, they were just at the bottom of Shinra Tower this whole time and just no one ever talked about it. And I'm like, oh, that's always kind of a weak justification for something in a story, kind of like again, to bring it back to fucking Star Wars, when they in Rise of Skywalker, they're like, oh yeah, Palpatine's back, somehow he's alive again, and it's like, what do you mean?
So
That was
the Yuffie DLC that lines up timeline wise. The Underground that lines up
Mhm.
timeline wise with the main timeline. I agree with you.